Have you ever been told without words that you don't belong? Imagine paying for the best seat, walking in with pride, only to be ordered out, not because of a mistake, but because of the color of your skin. That's what happened to Malcolm Rivers, a black CEO who quietly took his place in a VIP seat only to be forced to surrender it for white passengers who deserved it more. What would you do? Stay silent and swallow the humiliation, or rise and face the storm head-on? Most of us like to think we'd choose courage. But in that moment, when every eye stares, when every excuse is weaponized against you, what choice would you really make? This story isn't about one man's seat. It's about the dignity stolen from countless people every day, and the power of justice when it finally fights back. As you listen, I invite you to place yourself in that seat. Feel the sting, the silence, and the weight of one decision that could change everything. Stay with us, and if this story touches you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe because voices like this deserve to be heard. The cabin lights glowed a soft gold, reflecting off polished wood panels and leather seats. It was the kind of environment that whispered comfort, exclusivity, and order. At the very front of the plane, row 1, seat 1A. Malcolm Rivers sat quietly with a slim black notebook open across his lap. He wasn't writing anything at that moment, just resting the pen between his fingers, staring at the page as if words might come if he gave them enough silence. The engines hummed faintly, the pre-boarding chatter of other passengers filtering into the background. Malcolm looked like any other frequent flyer in a tailored Navy suit. Nothing flashy, no designer logo screaming for attention, just clean lines and understated confidence. His shoes were shined, his tie knotted neatly. If anything set him apart, it was the stillness he carried with him, a kind of calm that didn't demand respect but often received it anyway. Except not tonight. A flight attendant with a tight bun and tighter expression paused by his seat. Her name tag read Karen Doyle. She leaned in just enough to make her voice private, but her posture stiff. "Sir, I'm going to need to see your boarding pass again." Malcolm raised his eyes slowly, his expression polite but puzzled. Of course. He slid the pass from the pocket of his jacket and handed it over. Karen studied it, her lips pressing into a thin line. "This seat is reserved for VIP passengers." Malcolm tilted his head slightly. "I am a VIP passenger. That's what the boarding pass says." She didn't look at him when she answered, just over his shoulder toward the boarding door where 2 other passengers waited. A middle-aged white couple dressed in the kind of casual wealth that made linen look expensive. The man's polo was crisp. The woman's diamond bracelet caught the light with every movement of her hand. "There are VIPs tonight," Karen said. "You'll need to move." A ripple of something hot passed through Malcolm's chest, though his face stayed still. "I paid for this seat," he said evenly, directly, not with points, not with favors, with money. Karen's jaw tightened. "Sir, I don't want to make this a problem. Please collect your things." From behind, the woman in pearls spoke up, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "Honestly, can we just get settled? This is ridiculous." Phones lifted discreetly, then less discreetly. The scene was beginning to draw eyes. Someone whispered the words that Malcolm caught with perfect clarity. "Flying while black." He closed his notebook, slid the pen into the spine, and rested both hands on his knees. For a moment, he considered the choices: cause a scene or swallow the indignity. The man in the polo smirked at him. "You heard her. Let's not make everyone wait. That smirk, casual, dismissive, dripping with unearned authority, ignited something in Malcolm he usually kept buried. The memory of his father standing outside a train station in Montgomery, Alabama, in 1967 when a ticket agent refused to let him board first class because those seats aren't for people like you. Same look, same smirk. Malcolm rose slowly, not defeated, but deliberate. Every motion carried the weight of a man who understood eyes were on him. Phones recording, 1,000 judgments forming in real time. Is there a problem here? A supervisor had arrived. Richard Blackwell, his badge shining under the cabin light. He was heavy-set, silver hair, the kind of presence that expected obedience. No problem, Karen answered quickly. Just seating correction. Good, Blackwell said. He looked at Malcolm as though looking through him. Sir, follow me. Malcolm held his gaze a heartbeat longer than politeness allowed. Then he picked up his notebook and carry-on bag. As he stepped into the aisle, he felt dozens of eyes trail him, some pitying, some angry, some entertained. The woman in pearls smiled smugly as she slipped into his seat. Click. The sound of a phone camera. Someone in row 3 had started live streaming. The caption, already spreading across the internet, black man removed from VIP seat so white couple can sit. Malcolm didn't flinch. He just kept walking down the narrow aisle, his heart a drum against his ribs, his dignity tested yet again. But inside, a storm was forming. He had spent decades building Airline Technologies, a company that connected half the world's airlines through cloud logistics. He had turned layoffs into rehiring, bankruptcy into profitability. He had negotiated billion-dollar contracts in boardrooms where no one else looked like him. And now, here he was erased from seat 1A because someone decided he didn't belong. It wasn't just a seat. It was the same old story replaying with new uniforms. And something told him. This time, the story wasn't going to end quietly. The air outside the terminal smelled faintly of jet fuel and damp asphalt. Malcolm walked slowly through the glass doors, his carry-on bag rolling behind him, the notebook pressed tight under his arm. The night was cool, but his skin burned as if the humiliation had left a brand. People were staring not just at him, but at their phones. He caught glimpses of his own face frozen on screens. The moment Karen Doyle leaned in to question his right to sit where his ticket said he belonged. The live stream was already spreading. He didn't need to open Twitter or Instagram to know. The way passengers looked at him was enough, some nodding with sympathy, some sneering, and a few just curious, as if wondering whether they had just brushed past a headline. He kept walking until he found a quiet bench near the drop-off zone. The neon lights hummed, and every few seconds, headlights cut across his view as cars pulled up to collect passengers. He sat down heavily, opened his notebook, and tried to breathe through the knot in his chest. On the page, he wrote just 4 words, still happening, still here. Those words pulled him backward in time. He was 9 years old again, standing with his father at the Montgomery train station. His father, Leonard Rivers, had worked double shifts at the steel plant for weeks just to afford 2 first-class tickets. It was supposed to be a surprise, a special father-son trip to Atlanta, where Malcolm would see his first professional basketball game. They arrived early. Tickets crisp in Leonard's wallet, excitement buzzing through Malcolm's small body. He remembered how the station smelled of coal dust and roasted peanuts. He remembered the sound of his father's voice when he handed over the tickets firm, polite, hopeful, And then he remembered the agent's face, the way the man leaned back in his chair, eyebrows raised, and said, "First class. Not for your kind. You'll have to sit in the back." Malcolm could still see the way his father's shoulders stiffened. He didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. He simply placed a hand on his son's back and guided him away from the counter. They sat in silence on a splintered wooden bench until the train arrived. They rode in the cheap seats, the smell of smoke and sweat heavy in the air, while first class glided away behind a velvet curtain. That night, Leonard said only one thing before Malcolm fell asleep in the cramped motel bed. "Son, sometimes dignity isn't in the seat you're given. It's in how you carry yourself when they try to take it away." The memory burned like a coal in Malcolm's chest now. Decades later, the faces had changed. The uniforms were different, but the message was the same. "You don't belong here." He pressed his fingers against his temple, torn between fury and exhaustion. He had walked into boardrooms where he was the only black man in a sea of white suits, and he had endured. He had sat through dinners where billion-dollar clients assumed he was the driver, and he had smiled. He had built Airline Technologies from scratch, creating jobs, securing patents, reshaping the industry, and still, a flight attendant could look at his skin and decide he didn't deserve seat 1A. His phone buzzed, a message from his wife. Angela saw the video. "Are you okay? Kids are asking questions." He typed back slowly, "I'm okay. We'll talk when I'm home. Tell them I'll explain." But what could he explain? That history wasn't past but present, looping back on itself in quieter but equally brutal ways. That no matter how high he climbed, someone could still push him down with a single glance, a single assumption, another buzz. This time, his daughter Leah, a sophomore in high school. "Dad, people at school are already posting memes. It's everywhere. Why do they hate us so much?" Malcolm's throat tightened. He stared at her words, trying to find an answer that wouldn't break her heart. He wrote, "They don't hate you, sweetheart. They hate what they don't understand. We'll face this together. Don't believe the noise. Noise." That's what it was. The jeers, the whispers, the viral chatter. But beneath the noise was something heavier, something systemic. And Malcolm knew this time he couldn't just swallow the humiliation and walk on. This wasn't just about him. It was about every passenger who had ever been asked to prove their worth before taking a seat they had paid for. The rumble of an engine pulled him back. A black sedan rolled up, and the driver leaned out the window. Mr. Rivers Malcolm nodded. Patricia Winters, his chief of staff, must have sent the car. He climbed in, the leather seat cold against his back. As the driver pulled away, Malcolm closed his notebook and held it tight. The city lights blurred past. In the darkness, his mind replayed the smirk on the man's face, the condescension in Karen Doyle's voice, the way Richard Blackwell looked through him as if he were invisible. He whispered, almost to himself, "Not again. Not this time." The driver glanced at him in the rearview mirror but said nothing. Malcolm stared out the window, the reflection of his own face staring back, tired, angry, but unbroken. Back at the hotel, Angela was waiting in the lobby. She wrapped her arms around him before he could even put his bag down. "You shouldn't have to go through this," she whispered into his shoulder. "I know," he said softly, "but we always do." Upstairs, Leah was curled on the couch, her laptop open to a flood of comments. She looked up with red eyes. "They're saying you pulled the race card. Dad, that you faked it for attention, that you're just trying to make money off it. Malcolm sat beside her, closed the laptop gently, and held her hand. People will say anything when they're scared of the truth, but the truth doesn't need their permission. Angela touched his shoulder. What are you going to do? He looked at them, his wife, his daughter, and thought of his father on that splintered bench. Thought of all the benches, all the back rows, all the doors quietly closed over generations. His answer was quiet but certain. I'm going to make sure it doesn't happen again. Not to me, not to anyone. The room was silent except for the hum of the city outside the window. Malcolm opened his notebook once more and wrote another line beneath the first, this time. We fight. By dawn, the video had already circled the globe. Clips of Malcolm being asked to move, his quiet resistance, the smug smile of the white couple sliding into his seat, all of it repeated across millions of screens. The hashtags trended relentlessly, just justice for Malcolm, flying while black, VIP seat scandal. News anchors debated it before their first cups of coffee. Morning shows ran split-screen panels on one side, the grainy footage of the incident, on the other, experts dissecting race, privilege, and corporate responsibility. Malcolm sat at the kitchen table, coffee untouched, watching in silence. Angela scrolled through her phone, sighing at every new headline. Leah hovered in the doorway, hair messy from sleep, her eyes dark from hours spent reading comments she shouldn't have read. They're calling you a hero. Dad, she said, her voice carrying both pride and worry. But they're also calling you a liar. Malcolm rubbed the bridge of his nose. That's how it always goes. Truth makes people choose sides. Angela put her phone down with a thud. It's not just sides, it's threats. People are posting our address, pictures of the kids. We need more security. I've already called Patricia, Malcolm said softly. She's handling it. Even as he spoke, his phone buzzed. A message from Patricia appeared on the screen. Media storm growing. Investors nervous. Dawson fanning flames. Call ASAP. Malcolm exhaled slowly. Dawson. Of course, Richard Dawson, a wealthy businessman and professional provocateur, had been circling Malcolm for years. Dawson thrived on outrage, spinning cultural flashpoints into movements of resentment. If the video gave Malcolm a platform for justice, Dawson would twist it into fuel for division. Are you going to fight back? Leah asked. Malcolm met her gaze. Not fight. Led. He left the table and stepped into his office, where the walls were lined with photographs of Arian's milestones, patent signings, fleet launches, community scholarships. In the center hung a framed picture of his father in his steel plant uniform, grease on his hands, eyes proud. Malcolm dialed Patricia. She answered on the first ring. They're weaponizing this. Malcolm, she said without preamble. Dawson's already launched a crowdfunding campaign. He's calling it the Flying While White Legal Defense Fund. He's raised $50,000 in less than an hour. Malcolm closed his eyes. And what's he defending? The so-called right not to be accused of racism. He's telling people this is about protecting tradition, about stopping corporate overreach. He's mobilizing them. Malcolm, against you. For a moment, silence filled the line. Then Malcolm spoke, low and steady. Then we need to mobilize for something bigger than me, for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong. Patricia hesitated. Are you ready for the scale of this? It's not just corporate anymore. It's national, cultural. I didn't ask for it. Malcolm admitted. But I won't run from it either. Angela appeared in the doorway, her expression tight. Malcolm, we need to think about the kids, about what this is doing to them. He nodded, his throat thick. I know. He lowered his voice, almost whispering. I promised myself when Leah was born I'd never let her grow up thinking silence was the safer choice. If I don't stand now, what lesson does that teach her? Angela's eyes softened, but her jaw stayed firm. Then stand smart, not just loud, smart. The day unfolded like a storm. News crews parked outside their gated community. Paparazzi shouted questions from the sidewalk. Supporters left flowers at the driveway, while others spray-painted slurs in the night. By noon, Malcolm's sister Vanessa called in tears someone had vandalized her yard too, painting hateful words across the driveway. Neighbors had rallied to scrub it off, but the fear in her voice lingered. This isn't just about me anymore, Malcolm said to Patricia later that afternoon on a secure video call. They're targeting anyone connected to me, my family, my staff. We can't treat this like a PR crisis. This is a fight for dignity itself. Patricia, her hair pulled back, eyes shadowed from lack of sleep, nodded. Then we need to take control of the story. No more silence. Tomorrow, we hold a company-wide town hall. Every employee, every division, from pilots to custodians, and we make it public. Let the world hear you directly. Malcolm hesitated. That will put a target on all of us. There's already a target, Patricia said bluntly. At least this way, we choose where to stand. That night, after the house finally quieted and Leah drifted into restless sleep, Malcolm sat alone on the balcony. The city stretched before him, glittering and restless. He thought of the smirk in seat 1A, of his father's silence on the train, of his daughter's trembling question. Why do they hate us so much? The weight pressed on him, heavier than any contract or shareholder demand. He whispered to the night, to his father's memory, how do I carry this without breaking? No answer came, only the steady hum of the city below. But in his chest, beneath the exhaustion and fear, something solid remained. Not anger, not bitterness, resolve. The next morning would not be about salvaging reputation or calming investors. It would be about speaking truth into the storm, no matter who tried to shout him down. Because if his father had taught him anything, it was this: dignity isn't given, it's claimed. And Malcolm was ready to claim it not just for himself, but for every passenger, every employee, every child who deserved to walk through the world without having their worth questioned. The headquarters of Skybridge Airlines in Dallas had always prided itself on order. Glass walls gleamed, steel beams rose like ribs of a cathedral, and every corridor hummed with efficiency. But this morning, the air was thick with panic. Executives huddled in corners, clutching coffee cups as though caffeine might shield them from the storm brewing outside. On the 12th floor, in a conference room lined with screens, CEO Martin Kessler tapped a pen nervously against the table. His salt and pepper hair was combed to precision, but the lines around his mouth betrayed sleepless nights. To his right sat Claudia Whitmore, head of public affairs, her pearls glinting beneath the fluorescent lights. Beside her was her husband, Richard Whitmore, one of the airline's wealthiest investors. "Let's be clear," Claudia said sharply, her tone cutting through the low murmurs. "This is not about one man being asked to move seats. This is about perception. The story is out of control, and unless we manage it, We will lose more than just one CEO's goodwill." Richard leaned back, smirking. "Goodwill, Claudia. This is about not letting people like Malcolm Rivers dictate our policies. He bought a seat, fine, but VIP is more than money. It's about tradition, relationships, discretion. If every high-earning outsider demands the same treatment, what's left of exclusivity?" Kessler's pen stilled. "Richard, I need you to hear yourself. We're not talking about exclusivity. We're talking about a paying customer who was removed so you could sit, and now it's gone viral. This isn't a club membership, it's commerce, and commerce doesn't survive scandal." Claudia waved a manicured hand. "We've survived worse. Remember the turbulence lawsuit, the passenger dragged off the plane. We controlled the narrative. We can do it again. But this time was different, and they all knew it. The footage wasn't just messy, it was visceral." The calm dignity in Malcolm's face contrasted too sharply with the smug entitlement of the Whitmores sliding into his seat. It wasn't an abstract story. It was a symbol. Down the hall, Richard Blackwell, the supervisor who had escorted Malcolm from the cabin, sat in a smaller room with the airline's legal counsel. His tie was loose, his forehead damp. "I was just following procedure," he repeated for the third time. The lawyer, a young man with sharp eyes, scribbled notes. Procedure doesn't usually involve ignoring a valid ticket. Blackwell's jaw clenched. "I was told to prioritize VIPs. That's what I did." By whom the lawyer pressed. Blackwell hesitated, then muttered, "By Claudia Whitmore herself. She told me, before boarding, that she and her husband were to be accommodated no matter what." The lawyer stopped writing. Meanwhile, across town, Malcolm sat in his hotel suite with Patricia Winters, curtains drawn, phones buzzing. The room felt like a war bunker. Patricia paced, her heels tapping a staccato rhythm on the carpet. "They're scrambling," she said. "Kessler is trying to protect the airline, but the Whitmores are doubling down. They're painting you as disruptive, even dangerous. Dawson's platform is amplifying their spin. Hashtags are splitting into two camps. Half the country sees you as a victim of racism. The other half calls you an opportunist trying to cash in." Malcolm sat at the desk, fingers steepled under his chin. "And what do you see?" Patricia stopped pacing. "I see a man who didn't ask for this fight but can't walk away from it. I see a moment that could define the future of not just this airline, but the entire industry." Malcolm looked down at his notebook. On the page, his father's words stared back at him. "Dignity is in how you carry yourself when they try to take it away. I don't want revenge," he said quietly. "I want change, real change." Patricia nodded slowly. "Then you'll need to decide how much of yourself you're willing to risk, because they will come for everything: your business, your reputation, your family." A knock at the door interrupted them. Angela stepped in, holding Leah's hand. The girl's eyes were red again. "She's scared," Angela said softly. "Kids at school are calling her father a fraud. They're saying we made this up." Leah looked at him, tears brimming. "Why can't they just see the truth?" Malcolm pulled her close, resting his chin on her head. "Because truth scares people who benefit from lies. But we're not going to stop telling it." Back at Skybridge headquarters, Claudia was drafting a press release. "We regret the misunderstanding," she typed, "and affirm our commitment to all customers regardless of race, gender, or background." Kessler read over her shoulder. "This sounds like a brush-off." "It's corporate," Claudia replied. "That's the point. We calm the markets, shift attention, and wait for the next scandal. But for once, the cycle didn't move on. Instead, protests began forming outside airports in New York, Atlanta, Los Angeles. Passengers carried signs dignity has no seat class in flying, while black is not a crime. The airline's stock price dipped. Shareholders called emergency meetings. The media demanded interviews. And still, Malcolm remained silent in public, refusing to be baited into reaction. Inside, though, the weight pressed harder every hour. He walked the hotel balcony at night, his phone buzzing with messages from strangers. Some thanking him for standing tall, others cursing him with threats too vile to repeat. He couldn't show Leah those messages, couldn't let Angela bear them all. He held them close, swallowing the poison quietly. One evening, Patricia found him staring at the skyline. "What's stopping you from going on camera?" "Malcolm." "Why not tell your side?" He shook his head. "Because this isn't just about me. If I make it personal, they'll reduce it to ego. This has to be about something bigger, something they can't smear with sound bites." Patricia studied him. "Then tomorrow, at the town hall, speak not as a victim but as a leader. Show them the man who built Arian, not the man removed from seat 1A. Malcolm turned back to the city lights, his voice steady. "Tomorrow. Then." The auditorium at Arian Technologies headquarters had never felt so heavy with anticipation. Rows of employees filled every seat, from engineers in faded hoodies to executives in crisp suits. Screens lined the walls, broadcasting the event live to Arian offices around the world. Cameras from outside press outlets were allowed in, turning what was once an internal meeting into a global spectacle. Malcolm stood backstage, adjusting the cuffs of his navy suit jacket. His reflection in the glass door looked composed, but his chest felt tight. He whispered a line to himself, words his father used to repeat. Courage is carrying fear and still walking forward. Patricia appeared at his side, tablet in hand, headset dangling around her neck. "The world is watching," she said, voice low but firm. "Say what only you can say. Don't let them frame you. You frame yourself." Malcolm gave her a nod. "Thank you, Patricia." When he stepped onto the stage, the room erupted in applause, loud, raw, almost desperate. He raised a hand gently, quieting them, then stood at the podium. For a long moment, he said nothing, just scanned the room. He saw faces of people he'd hired straight out of college, machinists whose hands had built Arian's first prototypes, young analysts who whispered to one another about whether they'd have jobs tomorrow. He leaned toward the microphone. "Some of you know me as your CEO. Some of you only know me from a distance, a name on emails, a face in annual reports. Today, I want to stand before you not as a title, but as a man, a husband, a father, a son." The room hushed. 2 nights ago, on a flight many of you have seen by now, I was asked to leave my seat, a seat I had paid for, a seat I had every right to occupy. Why? Because someone else was deemed more deserving not by policy, not by merit, but by the color of my skin. A ripple of emotion swept through the audience. Some shook their heads. Others sat forward, fists clenched. I didn't shout. I didn't fight. I stood, and I walked away. But let me tell you something. Humiliation doesn't end when you leave a seat. It follows you. It follows your daughter to school, where classmates mock her father. It follows your wife, who has to answer reporters outside her home. It follows your employees, who are now asked if they stand with justice or convenience. His voice deepened, steady but charged. "This is not about me. It's about every one of you who has ever been told you don't belong. It's about the engineer whose ideas are ignored until someone else repeats them. It's about the technician passed over for promotion because he speaks with an accent. It's about the assistant mistaken for the help when she's the one running the meeting." A murmur of agreement spread. Heads nodded, eyes glistened. Malcolm paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Then he told them a story he hadn't shared publicly before. "When I was 9 years old, my father saved for months to buy us first-class train tickets to Atlanta. It was supposed to be a celebration. But when we got to the station, the ticket agent looked him in the eye and said, 'Not for your kind.' We sat in the back, on splintered wood, while the velvet seats up front stayed half empty. My father never complained, but that night, in a cheap motel room, he told me, 'Dignity is not in the seat they give you. It's in how you carry yourself when they try to take it away.'" His voice caught for a moment. The audience leaned in closer. "Friends, I carried myself quietly that night on the plane. But today, I carry something else. Resolve. Resolve that Aryan technologies will not be silent while systems of exclusion thrive. Resolve that we will lead not just in technology, but in dignity." Patricia, watching from the wings, felt a shiver run down her arms. Malcolm continued, "That's why I'm announcing today a new initiative we're calling Path to Dignity. Every division of this company will undergo training to uncover unconscious bias. We will invest in scholarships for underrepresented voices in aviation and technology. And we will create an independent ombuds office where any employee can report discrimination without fear of retaliation." Applause broke out, scattered at first, then growing until it filled the hall. But Malcolm wasn't finished. He raised his hand again for silence. "And to those who say this is politics, let me be clear. Dignity is not politics. Justice is not politics. This is about business because businesses that exclude talent lose talent. Businesses that silence truth collapse under the weight of their own lies. We will not be that business." The applause was thunderous now, some people rising to their feet. Yet in the front row a few executives remained seated, arms crossed. Malcolm saw them, and he knew the battle wasn't just outside these walls, it was inside them too. When the cheers subsided, Malcolm closed with words meant not just for the employees, but for the world beyond the cameras. We cannot control every headline. We cannot silence every critic, but we can choose who we are. Today, I choose to stand, not because it's easy, not because it's safe, but because my daughter deserves a world where dignity isn't debated, and so do yours." The room erupted again, this time louder, longer, unstoppable, later. As Malcolm stepped backstage, Angela was waiting. She hugged him tightly, whispering, "You gave them hope." Patricia squeezed his arm. "You also painted a target bigger than ever." Malcolm managed a faint smile. "Then let them aim. We'll still stand." Outside, the media frenzy intensified. Some headlines praised his courage, others accused him of weaponizing his platform. Commentators argued on screens across the nation, each soundbite sharper than the last. But in living rooms, offices, and classrooms, something else stirred. Viewers saw not just a man humiliated, but a leader refusing to bow. For many, it wasn't just Malcolm's story anymore, it was their own. The news cycle spun like a storm after Malcolm's town hall. Clips of his speech flooded social media, stitched into montages of standing ovations and tears in the audience. For every headline praising his courage, another accused him of turning Aryan into a soapbox. Investors called Patricia nonstop, demanding reassurance, and through it all, Malcolm tried to stay steady, but the pressure broke elsewhere first. Karen Doyle sat alone in her small apartment, blinds drawn against the flashing cameras outside. She had been the one on the plane, the face now immortalized in 1,000 memes, the flight attendant who asked too much. Some called her a racist, others called her a scapegoat. But to Karen, all she felt was shame and anger. She had worked for Skybridge for 22 years. She'd followed protocol, or at least what she thought protocol was. VIP passengers had always been prioritized, and when Claudia Whitmore gave her a quiet instruction before boarding. Karen believed she was just doing her job, but none of that mattered now. The airline had issued a statement she was terminated for gross misconduct. Karen stared at the termination letter on her kitchen table. The words blurred as tears welled in her eyes. She had given her life to this job, missed birthdays, holidays, even her mother's funeral because she was always in the air. And now she was discarded in a single breath. She reached for her phone, scrolling through the avalanche of messages. Some were death threats. Others were reporters begging for interviews. A few were from old colleagues who told her to stay strong, but none of them eased the crushing weight in her chest. By evening, she opened her laptop and typed a letter. Her fingers shook, but the words came fast. I made a mistake. I should have stood up for what was right. Instead, I obeyed an order. I failed Mr. Rivers. I failed myself. I don't know how to live with the weight of it. She posted it online and then, with a bottle of pills in her hand, walked into her bathroom across town. Malcolm was reviewing data with Patricia when Angela rushed in, phone in hand. "Malcolm, it's Karen Doyle," she said, her voice sharp with fear. "She's in the hospital. Suicide attempt." Malcolm froze. Patricia muttered a curse under her breath. "The media's going to eat this alive. They'll say your speech pushed her over the edge." But Malcolm wasn't thinking about optics. He grabbed his coat. Where is she? Hours later, he sat in the sterile glow of a hospital room. Karen lay unconscious, an IV in her arm. Machines beeped steadily, fragile proof of her survival. Malcolm studied her face, the same face that had told him he didn't belong in Seat 1A. But, stripped of uniform and authority, she just looked small, human. A nurse adjusted the monitors and whispered, "She's stable. Lucky her neighbor found her in time." When Karen finally stirred, her eyes fluttered open. She blinked at him in confusion, her voice hoarse. "Why are you here?" Malcolm leaned forward, his voice low. "Because no matter what happened, your life matters. You're more than one mistake." Tears pooled at the corners of her eyes. "You don't understand. They made me the villain, but I was following orders. Claudia told me to clear that seat, and I didn't question it. I thought I was doing my job. Now I'm the monster." Malcolm sat back, the truth cutting through him. He'd suspected Claudia's role, but hearing it confirmed from Karen's lips made the injustice burn hotter. Yet, looking at Karen, he didn't see a monster. He saw a woman broken by a system that demanded obedience over conscience. "You failed that night," Malcolm said gently, "but failure doesn't have to be the end. The real test is what you do now." Karen shook her head weakly. "What can I do? I've lost everything." Malcolm thought of his father, of the words spoken in a cheap motel room decades ago. Dignity wasn't in the seat. It was in how you carried yourself when it was taken away. He reached for Karen's trembling hand. You can stand up. Tell the truth, not for me, but for yourself, for everyone who's ever been silenced by fear. Her tears spilled freely now. Why would you give me that chance after what I did to you? Because revenge changes nothing, Malcolm said, but redemption. Redemption can change everything. Patricia, standing quietly at the doorway, watched with a mix of surprise and admiration. She had expected Malcolm to walk away, to protect his image. Instead, he was doing something far harder, offering grace where the world wanted punishment. When Malcolm left the hospital that night, the air outside was cold, biting against his skin. Patricia fell into step beside him. You just opened a door for her. She said, she needs it, Malcolm replied. And you, Patricia added, just made this battle 10 times more complicated. Forgiving her will look weak to some people. They'll say you let the enemy off the hook. Malcolm looked up at the stars barely visible through the city lights. Maybe, but I don't want to build this fight on someone else's ruin. If we're going to change the system, it has to start with showing there's a better way. Patricia shook her head but couldn't hide a small smile. You never take the easy path. Do you? Malcolm smiled faintly. Easy paths don't change the world. By morning, Karen's confession had leaked. Her post-suicide attempt statement spread across the internet. Shared thousands of times I was following orders. I should have chosen conscience over obedience. I failed. The revelation sent shockwaves. For the first time, the spotlight turned squarely on Claudia Whitmore. Reporters camped outside her mansion, demanding answers. Skybridge executives scrambled, caught between distancing themselves from Claudia and protecting one of their most powerful investors. Meanwhile, public opinion shifted. For many, Karen's vulnerability reframed the story. It wasn't just about racism in the skies. It was about how power demanded complicity, how ordinary people were crushed between obedience and morality. Malcolm didn't celebrate. He sat at the breakfast table with Angela and Leah, sipping coffee in silence. Leah scrolled through the latest headlines and looked up at him. You forgave her, didn't you? Malcolm met her gaze. I didn't excuse what she did, but I gave her a chance to stand again. Sometimes, that's the only way forward. Leah nodded slowly, her eyes shining. I think Grandpa would have been proud. Malcolm swallowed hard, the memory of his father rising fresh in his chest. Maybe she was right. Maybe dignity wasn't about never falling. It was about choosing how to rise after. Karen's confession detonated like a bomb across morning news shows. Anchors replayed her handwritten note and her hospital bed apology in somber tones. For the first time since the incident, Malcolm noticed that the online fury wasn't directed at him, but at the structure that had set Karen up for failure. Hashtags like "shot conscience over obedience" began trending, alongside Whitmore Gate. At Airline headquarters, the atmosphere was electric. Employees who had once whispered in hallways now spoke openly about their experiences. A mechanic recalled how he had been told to stay invisible when VIPs toured the hangar. A Latina ticket agent described being reprimanded for speaking Spanish to a passenger who had asked for help. Each story poured fuel on the fire, exposing a culture that had long rewarded silence. Patricia entered Malcolm's office with 2 cups of coffee and a grim look. Claudia's issuing a statement at noon. She said she's denying everything, claims Karen's lying to save face. Malcolm sighed. Of course she is. Power never admits fault until it has no choice. Angela, perched on the arm of his chair, looked at him with quiet concern. Are you prepared for what comes next? This isn't just about Claudia anymore. It's about an entire network that benefits from keeping people like us in our place. He nodded slowly. I know, and that's why we can't back down. By noon, Claudia appeared on national television, standing behind the polished oak podium in her family's estate. She wore pearls, her voice calm, almost maternal. I've served this industry with dignity for decades. I would never give an order that undermines a passenger's rights. These accusations are baseless, manufactured by those who wish to tarnish my family's legacy. The statement was vintage Claudia smooth, practiced, dripping with entitlement. But cracks showed. Reporters shouted questions, citing Karen's hospital statement. But Claudia swept past them into her mansion. Malcolm watched the broadcast with his executive team. Ashley, the head of passenger advocacy, muttered, "She looks like every politician who's been caught lying." Patricia crossed her arms. "We can't rely on optics. We need proof." Proof arrived sooner than expected. That evening, Michael Torres, a young baggage handler, approached Arion's legal department with trembling hands. He carried an old phone with a cracked screen. "I wasn't sure if I should come forward," he said, "but I heard what Mr. Rivers said about redemption, and I think this matters." On the phone was a recording Claudia's unmistakable voice instructing Karen at the boarding gate. "That seat belongs to my guests. I don't care who he is. Handle it discreetly." The room fell silent as the recording played. Patricia exhaled slowly. This changes everything." Malcolm closed his eyes for a moment. The proof vindicated him, yes, but more importantly, it exposed the rot in a system that let people like Claudia command unquestioned authority. He opened his eyes and looked at Michael. "You did the right thing. This will help more people than you know." The next day, Arion's legal team leaked the recording to the press. Within hours, Claudia's statement unraveled. News outlets ran side-by-side comparisons, Claudia's denial versus her own recorded words. The contrast was damning. Protesters gathered outside Whitmore Group headquarters, chanting for accountability. Inside Arion, employees felt a strange mixture of relief and unease. Relief that the truth was out. Unease because truth often came with consequences. Would Claudia retaliate? Would her allies in the industry close ranks? Malcolm gathered his staff in the auditorium. The air buzzed with anticipation. He stepped onto the stage, not with a script, but with the weight of responsibility. "Some of you may have seen the recording released this morning," he began. "It confirms what Karen Doyle told us, that she was following an order. That order came from someone who believed her power made her untouchable." He paused, scanning the faces before him. Some looked angry, others looked hopeful, many looked tired of carrying stories of discrimination with no safe place to set them down. "But here's what I want you to understand," Malcolm continued. "This isn't just about Claudia Whitmore. This is about every system that rewards obedience over conscience. Every workplace where people are told to stay quiet or risk their jobs. Every moment when doing the right thing feels impossible. That changes now. At Arion, conscience will never again be punished." The applause began cautiously, then swelled until the room thundered. Employees rose to their feet, some with tears streaming down their cheeks. For the first time, Malcolm felt the company leaning with him, not against him. Still, he knew the fight wasn't over. That night, threats escalated. An anonymous message scrawled across Arion's New York office. "You're destroying tradition. You'll pay." Leah saw the images online and clenched her fists. "Why do they hate you for wanting fairness?" she asked. Malcolm wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Because fairness threatens the comfort they've built on someone else's suffering." Leah's eyes shimmered with determination. "Then we have to keep going. For Grandpa. For everyone." The next morning, Malcolm received a call from an unexpected source, Margaret Lynn, a respected shareholder known for her quiet influence. Her voice was steady. "Mr. Rivers, I've been watching closely. My late husband faced discrimination in this industry. He always told me, change only comes when someone's willing to be hated for it. You are that someone. I want you to know I'll stand with you at the shareholder meeting." It was a lifeline. With Claudia mobilizing her allies, every vote mattered. But beyond the boardroom politics, Malcolm felt something deeper shifting. Employees were speaking openly. Shareholders were choosing conscience over convenience. And passengers, ordinary people, were flooding Arion's inbox with messages of solidarity. On social media, a young black woman posted a selfie from Arion's first-class cabin. The caption read, "For the first time. No one questioned if I belonged here. Thank you, Arion." The post went viral, shared tens of thousands of times. Patricia showed Malcolm the numbers. Brand sentiment is up 40% in 2 days. "We're losing some customers, but we're gaining far more. You've turned a scandal into a movement." Malcolm shook his head. "Not me. Us. Every employee who chooses dignity over silence. Every passenger who believes fairness isn't optional." Patricia smiled faintly. "You really believe redemption is possible? Don't you?" Malcolm glanced at the hospital flowers he'd sent to Karen, now sitting on his desk. "I have to, because without redemption, all we're left with is ruin." The shareholder meeting loomed, but for the first time since seat 1A, Malcolm felt steady. The tide had turned. Justice wasn't complete, but it was in motion, and this time, it was bigger than him. It was about everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. The conference room at Arion's Manhattan headquarters had never felt so heavy. It was designed for comfort mahogany tables, plush leather chairs, a skyline view that whispered success, but this morning it felt like a battlefield. Every chair was filled with shareholders, lawyers, advisors. Television crews had gathered outside, feeding the story live to anyone who cared to watch. Malcolm entered quietly. Patricia on one side, Angela on the other. Leah had begged to come, but he'd told her school was more important. Still, he felt her presence in the weight of his tie clip, a gift she'd bought with her allowance, engraved with the words, "Stand tall." At the far end of the table sat Claudia Whitmore. Her pearls gleamed under the lights, her expression serene, but her eyes were sharp as knives. Around her clustered a group of loyalists, whispering strategy, their suits immaculate, their smiles thin. The corporate secretary called the meeting to order. "The motion before us is the removal of Malcolm Rivers as Chief Executive Officer of Arion Airlines. Shareholders will vote after discussion." Claudia rose first. Her voice carried the confidence of old money, honed in countless boardrooms. "Fellow shareholders, Arion is on the brink of collapse under Mr. Rivers's so-called reforms. We've seen billions wiped from our market value in days. He has turned an unfortunate incident into a political crusade. This company was built on efficiency, discipline, tradition, not on social experiments. Murmurs rippled across the room. Patricia scribbled a note and slid it to Malcolm. Stay calm. Data is your weapon. Malcolm stood slowly, buttoning his jacket. His voice was measured, steady, almost quiet at first, but it carried. Tradition, Ms. Whitmore. Let's talk about what tradition has given us. 6 years ago, Airline ranked last in customer satisfaction. 4 years ago, we were months from bankruptcy. Tradition nearly killed this company. Change saved it. He gestured to the screen behind him, where charts lit up revenue growth, improved satisfaction, expanded routes. In 3 years, we increased revenue 40%. We've added dozens of routes. We turned this company from a failing relic into a leader. And we did it not by clinging to the past, but by daring to move forward. Claudia leaned forward, eyes narrowing, and in the past week, you've destroyed it all. Stock prices fallen, employees walking out, passengers stranded. Stock prices dip in storms, Malcolm countered. But culture is what determines if an airline survives the next storm. And let me be clear, the storm we face isn't falling stock prices. It's systemic discrimination. It's the belief that a passenger's worth is determined by their skin color or their last name. That is the real threat to Aryan. The room buzzed again, louder this time. Some shareholders frowned, others nodded thoughtfully. From the gallery, Margaret Lynn's voice rang out. She was small, elderly, but her words carried weight. My late husband founded one of the first Asian airlines. American executives would shake his white assistant's hand and ignore him, the owner. Discrimination nearly destroyed his dream. I tell you this, a company that doesn't confront injustice is a company already dying. The words hung in the air like a gavel strike. Claudia recovered quickly, her tone tightening. And what of accountability, Mr. Rivers fired employees without due process. He humiliated this company on national television. He tied his compensation to diversity metrics no airline has ever prioritized. Is this leadership or vanity disguised as virtue? Malcolm drew a slow breath. This was the moment. Accountability is exactly what we've lacked. And as for my compensation, yes, it's tied to inclusion, because what gets measured gets managed. If we don't improve, I don't get paid. That's not vanity. That's responsibility. He turned to the shareholders directly, letting his voice sharpen. You can remove me today. You can vote to protect tradition, to keep Claudia comfortable. But ask yourselves, will that make Aryan stronger? Will passengers choose us because we defend discrimination? Or will they choose airlines that treat them with dignity? Because I assure you, our competitors are watching. United, Delta, American. They're already drafting policies modeled on ours. The change is coming, with or without us. The only question is, do we lead it or get left behind? The silence that followed was thick. Claudia's lips tightened. She whispered furiously to her allies. The secretary called the roll for the vote. One by one, shareholders declared their positions. The early tally was as expected. Claudia's block strong, Malcolm's base unwavering, 45% to 45%. The final 10% scattered among undecideds. A pension fund rep from New York rose. We vote to retain Mr. Rivers. Applause broke out, quickly hushed. A sovereign wealth fund delegate from the Middle East. We vote for removal. The tension ratcheted higher. 46 to 46. 3% undecided. Finally, Margaret Lynn rose again. I hold 1% of Aryan stock. My husband once told me the only thing worse than experiencing discrimination is perpetuating it. But he also said anger makes for bad business. I believe Mr. Rivers understands the difference. I vote to retain him as CEO. The room erupted. Claudia slammed her folder shut, fury flashing across her face. This is a travesty. She snapped. You're sacrificing profit on the altar of politics. Malcolm's voice cut through the noise. No. Claudia, I'm choosing humanity over hatred, and history will remember which of us was on the right side. The final tally was read 51% to 49%. Malcolm retained his position. The boardroom split cheers on one side, outrage on the other. Claudia stood, pearls rattling against her chest, her voice trembling with rage. This isn't over. I will take this to federal court. I will expose you for the radical you are. Malcolm met her gaze steadily. You're welcome to try, but every day you fight for discrimination, your investments lose value. Ask yourself, Claudia, is this really the hill you want to die on? Her face hardened, but she said nothing more. Gathering her papers, she swept from the room, her entourage trailing like shadows. As the door closed behind her, the tension broke. Supporters clapped Malcolm on the back. Patricia allowed herself the smallest grin. Angela squeezed his hand under the table, but Malcolm felt no triumph, only relief and the weight of what came next. He knew this was not the end of the battle, only a momentary victory. Implementation would be brutal. Resistance would be fierce. But for now, progress had edged forward. That night, as the city lights shimmered outside his window, Malcolm received a text from Leah. We watched in class. Everyone cheered when you won. My teacher said you're making history. Malcolm smiled faintly, his exhaustion tempered by pride. Maybe history was exactly what they were making, not with grand speeches or perfect victories, but with each step taken toward dignity. 2 days after the shareholder vote, Aryan's terminals looked like war zones. Rows of delayed flights stacked across departure boards. Passengers slumped on plastic chairs, angry voices rising as hours dragged on. News cameras prowled the gates, hungry for footage of chaos. The cause was simple, but devastating: a mass sick-out. Hundreds of flight attendants and pilots had called in unfit to work, grounding nearly a third of Aryan's fleet. On paper, it was a protest about scheduling and workload. In reality, it was retaliation. Patricia stormed into Malcolm's office, her phone buzzing nonstop. This is sabotage, she snapped, tossing a folder onto his desk. The union's not claiming responsibility, but we know who's behind it. Claudia's people are pulling strings. Malcolm rubbed his temples. He hadn't slept much since the vote. If we accuse them without proof, we look paranoid. If we do nothing, the airline collapses. Angela appeared in the doorway, carrying a thermos of tea. You can't outshout them. Malcolm, not this time. You have to show passengers they still matter, even in the middle of a storm. Her words stuck. He nodded slowly. All right, let's go to the airport. By mid-afternoon, Malcolm and Patricia were walking the concourses of JFK, flanked by a handful of staff. Cameras swiveled as passengers realized who had entered the terminal. A group of stranded travelers shouted, "Do something!" A mother with 2 kids in tow broke down crying, saying she couldn't miss her father's surgery in Houston. Malcolm knelt beside her children, his suit creasing against the linoleum floor. "You'll get there," he promised softly. Then he turned to Patricia. "Reroute them on Delta. I'll cover the tickets personally if we have to." Patricia blinked. "That's do it," Malcolm said firmly. Word of the gesture spread quickly. By evening, videos flooded TikTok and Twitter, the CEO of Airline personally helping passengers, rerouting flights, carrying bags. A clip of him lifting a suitcase into an overhead bin for an elderly woman went viral with the caption, "This is leadership." But the storm raged on. By the next morning, thousands more flights were canceled. Airline's competitors circled like vultures, offering stranded passengers discount vouchers. The stock tumbled again. Inside the operations center, Patricia slammed her palm on the table. "We can't run an airline on goodwill alone. We need planes in the air." Malcolm leaned forward. "Then we get planes in the air. Volunteers only. Call in every retired pilot, every off-duty crew who believes in what we're building. I'll go on national TV tonight and ask for their help." That evening, Malcolm sat under the harsh studio lights of a primetime news interview. The anchor wasted no time. "Mr. Rivers, Airline is in crisis. Flights grounded, customers furious." "Are you in over your head?" Malcolm clasped his hands calmly. "Airline is facing sabotage, not failure. And I won't sugarcoat it, this is hard. But here's what I know. Thousands of our employees still believe in fairness, still believe in treating passengers with dignity. To those people, I say, if you're healthy and able, come fly with us. Let's show the world that conscience and competence are not opposites." The anchor raised an eyebrow. "You think that's enough to turn things around?" Malcolm's eyes burned steady into the camera. "I don't think. I know." The next morning, volunteers began trickling in. Retired captains dusted off their uniforms. Off-duty attendants canceled vacations to help. Even a few employees from rival airlines offered temporary assistance, inspired by Malcolm's appeal. By day 3, Airline managed to restore 40% of its flights. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to show resilience. Passengers began sharing stories online, surprise thank you meals in terminals, free hotel vouchers. Malcolm himself walking the gates at 2 a.m., shaking hands and apologizing personally. Still, Claudia struck back. A leaked memo from one of her allies accused Malcolm of exploiting workers, painting him as reckless. Cable pundits debated nightly, was he a hero or a liability? The tension reached a breaking point when a group of protesters stormed Airline's headquarters, waving signs that read "Rivers out" and "Keep politics off planes." Security barely contained the chaos. That night, Malcolm sat at his kitchen table. Leah curled up beside him with homework spread across the wood. She looked up quietly. "Daddy, why don't they see you're trying to help?" He stroked her hair, his chest aching. Sometimes, when people are afraid of change, they'd rather destroy it than face it. Leah's eyes narrowed with fierce innocence. "Then don't let them. Show them they can't win." Her words lit something in him. He kissed her forehead, stood, and dialed Patricia. "Tomorrow, we go bigger. No more playing defense. It's time to call Claudia out by name." The next day, Malcolm convened a press conference at Airline headquarters. The room overflowed with reporters, cameras flashing like fireworks. Patricia stood at his side, her posture rigid, ready for fallout. Malcolm stepped up to the podium, his voice calm but unyielding. "For days, We've endured a coordinated effort to paralyze Ariane. Make no mistake, this is not about worker health. This is about fear. Fear of change, fear of justice, and we know who's behind it. He paused, letting the silence thicken. Then he said the name, Claudia Whitmore. The room gasped. Reporters shouted questions, their voices colliding. Malcolm held up a hand. We have recordings. We have testimonies. We know Claudia and her allies pressured staff to disrupt our operations. But here's what they didn't count on our resilience. Ariane will not bow to sabotage. We will not bow to hate. We will fly higher because of it. The footage dominated headlines. Within hours, federal investigators announced a probe into the sick-out. Claudia, once untouchable, now faced scrutiny she couldn't wave away with pearls and pedigree. That night, Malcolm sat on his balcony, city lights flickering like distant stars. Angela brought him a glass of water, her hand resting on his shoulder. "You did it," she whispered. He shook his head slowly. "Not yet, but for the first time, I think we might." The investigation into Claudia's alleged sabotage hadn't even begun before the internet decided its own verdict. Within hours of Malcolm's press conference, hashtags multiplied like wildfire, fly with rivers, ground Claudia, dignity in the skies, Twitter spaces filled with passengers sharing stories of discrimination on airlines, each one tagging Ariane as the company daring to face the issue head-on. Angela scrolled through comments while Malcolm sipped his late-night tea. "Listen to this," she said. "I was told to smile more by a flight supervisor when I complained about harassment. That was Ariane 3 years ago. Today, I finally believe change is real." Malcolm closed his eyes for a moment. Each story was like a wound reopening, but also like proof the fight wasn't in vain. "They're speaking because they believe someone's listening now," he murmured. Leah leaned over from the couch, eyes wide with excitement. "Dad, you're trending on TikTok. Some college kid made a remix of your speech with a beat under it. It already has 1 million views." Malcolm chuckled despite his fatigue. That's one way to keep people engaged. The digital storm grew stronger the next morning when a viral thread appeared from a passenger named Jamal Harris. He had been on the very flight where Malcolm was forced out of seat 1A. Jamal's video showed the entire sequence from his phone, the confrontation with Karen, the smug glance from Claudia's guests, the shuffle down the aisle. He narrated over the clip they wanted to humiliate him. But they didn't know who he was or the movement they'd ignite. The video reached 10 million views in 24 hours. Major networks replayed it non-stop. What had begun as scandal was now morphing into a cultural flashpoint, a referendum on race, class, and dignity at 30,000 feet. Inside Ariane headquarters, Patricia convened the communications team. "We need to ride this wave, not drown in it," she said. "Every story that comes out, every video, every tweet has to point back to our reforms. We're not just reacting to a scandal. We're leading a revolution in customer dignity." Malcolm agreed but raised a caution. "If we turn this into a marketing stunt, we lose trust. This isn't about hashtags, it's about people. The moment we look like we're capitalizing, we're finished." Ashley, head of passenger advocacy, leaned forward. "What if we build a platform not for Ariane, but for the people? A digital portal where passengers can share their stories, good, bad, anonymous if they want. We'll publish reports on the data. It becomes a living record of how people are treated in the skies." Patricia's eyes lit up. "A dignity dashboard." Malcolm nodded slowly. Yes, but it must be independent, hosted by a nonprofit. Arion can seed the funding, but the oversight comes from outside voices. Otherwise, it's propaganda. That afternoon, Arion announced the launch of the Sky Dignity Project. The website went live with a simple statement, "Your story matters. Tell it here." Within hours, thousands of posts poured in, some harrowing, some hopeful, all raw. A grandmother described being ignored for assistance because she spoke limited English. A veteran shared how a gate agent had escorted him to first class when his prosthetic leg set off alarms. The press hailed the initiative as groundbreaking. Competitors scrambled to respond, but most stumbled with copycat statements that felt hollow. Arion's transparency was impossible to fake. Meanwhile, Claudia tried to mount her counterattack. Her allies funneled money into smear campaigns, painting Malcolm as a race-baiting executive and Arion as a political stunt. Conservative pundits railed nightly against him, but their fury only amplified the story. Every insult became another rallying cry for his supporters. Still, the stress weighed heavily. One night, Malcolm sat in his study long after Angela and Leah had gone to bed. His inbox overflowed with messages, threats, pleas, praise, accusations. He scrolled until his eyes burned, then shut the laptop and stared at the family photos on the wall. His father, arms crossed, gaze steady. His mother, holding infant Malcolm with a smile that said hope was possible even when it seemed impossible. He whispered into the quiet, "Am I leading or just surviving?" The next morning brought a twist. Karen Doyle, still recovering but stronger, released a video statement from her hospital room. Her hair was unkempt, her voice raspy, but her words were clear. "I failed in my duty that day. I let fear guide me instead of conscience, but I will not let silence define me anymore. The truth is, Claudia Whitmore ordered me to remove Mr. Rivers, and I obeyed. For that, I am deeply sorry." The video detonated online. Suddenly, Karen wasn't the villain but a complicated figure, an ordinary worker crushed between power and morality. The public conversation shifted if even she could find courage. What excuse did others have? Malcolm called her directly. "Karen." "That took strength," he said. Her voice cracked. "I don't deserve thanks, but maybe someone out there will think twice before obeying an unjust order. You've already made that possible," Malcolm replied. By evening, the digital uprising had grown beyond Arion. Hashtags appeared for other industries: dignity in healthcare, dignity at work, dignity in justice. The movement had transcended airlines. It had become a mirror America couldn't ignore. At dinner, Leah poked at her mashed potatoes, then looked up at her parents. "Dad, are you scared?" Malcolm paused. "Yes, every day. But you keep going," she said softly. He smiled faintly, because dignity is bigger than fear. The morning began with headlines as sharp as knives. Rivers, or Ruin Arion's CEO, sparks culture, war in the skies. Claudia Whitmore, victim of smear, or architect of sabotage, America divided at 30,000 feet. Malcolm flipped through the papers at his breakfast table, Angela watching him carefully. "They've stopped reporting the truth," she said softly. "It's all about the battle now." He sighed, setting the newspaper aside. "That's the media war. It isn't about facts. It's about framing." Patricia called 15 minutes later, her voice sharp with urgency. "CNN wants you tonight. Fox has already booked Claudia. If you don't counter her narrative, she'll own the story by morning." Malcolm pinched the bridge of his nose. So they want a gladiator match. They want ratings, Patricia corrected. But if we play it right, we can turn that into truth. That evening, Malcolm entered a studio lit like an arena. Across the split screen, Claudia sat in her mansion, pearls gleaming, her smile controlled. The host wasted no time. Ms. Whitmore, you claim you never issued the order to remove Mr. Rivers from his seat, yet multiple witnesses and a recording suggest otherwise. Why should the public believe you? Claudia's voice dripped with practiced innocence. Because I've spent my life in this industry. I would never jeopardize the dignity of a passenger. This is a coordinated campaign to silence me for speaking uncomfortable truths about Arian's leadership. The host pivoted to Malcolm. Mr. Rivers, she says you're weaponizing identity politics to consolidate power, that your reforms are performative. What do you say? Malcolm folded his hands on the desk. Speaking slowly, I say dignity isn't politics. It's humanity. A seat on a plane doesn't ask what color you are before keeping you safe. Why should we? What happened to me is what happens to countless others every day, except they don't have the cameras or the title of CEO to protect them. The studio fell silent for a beat. Even the host seemed caught off guard by the weight of his words. Claudia snapped back quickly. And what about the chaos at your airline passengers stranded? Stock prices falling. Where's the dignity in that? Malcolm leaned forward. The chaos wasn't caused by reforms. It was caused by sabotage, by people who fear accountability more than they love justice. And dignity is rerouting a stranded mother to her father's surgery, even if it costs us. Dignity is employees volunteering to fly when others staged sick-outs. That's the Aryan I see. The clip was replayed millions of times overnight. Some networks mocked him as naive. Others lauded him as visionary. But everywhere, the debate raged hotter. America wasn't just watching an airline, it was watching itself. Behind the scenes, Patricia coordinated round-the-clock media strategy. Every time Claudia appeared on one network, Malcolm countered on another. Every smear ad she funded was met with testimonials from passengers whose dignity had been restored. Volunteers flooded Arian's terminals handing out water and snacks to stranded travelers, filming clips that went viral under the tag, "Mashjan, we fly together." But Claudia wasn't finished. She funded an aggressive documentary-style special, The Truth About Rivers, airing on a major cable channel. It painted Malcolm as power-hungry, cherry-picking out-of-context clips of his speeches, cutting them between images of angry passengers at airports. The final line boomed, "Do you want politics on every flight or peace in the skies?" Angela sat beside Malcolm as they watched it air. "It's dishonest," she muttered, fists clenched. "It's effective," Malcolm admitted quietly. "That's the danger." Patricia called minutes later. "We need a counterpunch, not just interviews. Something bigger, something they can't twist." Ashley from Passenger Advocacy had an idea. "What if we host a public forum, not in a boardroom, not in a studio, in a terminal, cameras rolling, passengers speaking for themselves. Let them tell their truth, unfiltered." It was risky, live broadcasts always were, but Malcolm agreed. 2 days later, Terminal C at JFK transformed into a stage. Reporters swarmed, passengers lined the balconies. The event was streamed live across networks and social media. Malcolm opened simply, "I can talk about policies all day, but this movement isn't about me. It's about people, real stories, real dignity." He stepped aside, handing the microphone to passengers. A black veteran recounted being forced to check his medals because a gate agent doubted their authenticity. A Latina nurse described being denied water on a flight when she wore scrubs after a 12-hour shift. Then, a retired pilot spoke, "I came back to fly during the sick out, not because I wanted politics, but because I wanted justice." The forum ended with a standing ovation, broadcast live to millions. For the first time, the narrative wasn't shaped by pundits, it was shaped by the people. Claudia tried to dismiss it as theater, but the momentum shifted again. Editorials praised Malcolm's willingness to give the microphone away. Polls showed growing public trust in Aryan, even as Claudia's credibility waned. That night, as Malcolm walked through the quiet terminal with Angela, the exhaustion etched across his face, she touched his arm. "You know you're changing more than an airline, don't you?" He smiled faintly. That's what scares them most. The summons arrived on official letterhead, crisp and commanding. The House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure wanted Malcolm Rivers to testify. The hearing was framed as an inquiry into airline practices, but everyone knew it was really about him, about Seat 1A, about Claudia, about dignity in the skies. Patricia slid the letter across Malcolm's desk. "You knew this was coming," she said. "Claudia's lobbyists have been pushing for it since the shareholder vote. She thinks Congress will do her dirty work." Angela, seated across the room, frowned. "They'll try to tear you apart on live television. Are you ready for that?" Malcolm held the letter quietly, fingers brushing the embossed seal. "I don't need to be ready to defend myself. I need to be ready to defend the people who don't get seats at this table." The day of the hearing, Washington buzzed like a hive. Protesters filled the steps of the Capitol, half waving signs that read "Stand with Rivers," half shouting for his resignation. Inside, cameras lined the chamber, broadcasting the proceedings nationwide. Claudia was already there, seated smugly with her legal team. Her pearls gleamed under the fluorescent lights. She greeted certain committee members like old friends, a reminder of her influence. When Malcolm entered, the room hushed. He wore a simple navy suit, no flair, no theatrics, just steady calm. Patricia flanked him, carrying folders stuffed with documents. Angela watched from the gallery, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The chairman banged the gavel. "This hearing is now in session." The first hours were brutal. Lawmakers grilled Malcolm on Arion's financial losses, the sick-out chaos, the viral videos. One congressman sneered, "Mr. Rivers, is this an airline or a social experiment?" Malcolm answered calmly. "It's both, because the way we treat people is inseparable from how we run a business. Efficiency without dignity isn't success, it's exploitation." Another congresswoman pressed harder. "Your policies have alienated employees. Pilots are walking out. Flight attendants are suing. Isn't it true you've created division where there was none?" Malcolm leaned forward, his voice quiet but firm. "Division existed long before me. It just stayed hidden. All I've done is bring it to light, and sunlight may sting, but it heals." The exchange lit up social media instantly. Hashtags from both sides trended on "Sunlight Heals" and "Deas Ground Rivers." Then came Claudia's turn. She adjusted her pearls and spoke with polished certainty. "For decades, I've invested in this industry. Never once have I sought to undermine a passenger's dignity. These accusations are fabrications, designed to distract from Mr. Rivers' failures," a sympathetic senator asked. "So you categorically deny ordering the removal of Mr. Rivers, from his seat, Claudia smiled coolly. Absolutely. That was the decision of individual staff. I was not involved. Patricia slid a USB drive to the committee clerk. On it was Michael Torres's recording, the one capturing Claudia's voice at the gate. The chairman pressed play. Claudia's unmistakable words filled the chamber. That seat belongs to my guests. I don't care who he is. Handle it discreetly. The room erupted. Reporters scrambled. Cameras zoomed in on Claudia's pale face. She tried to recover, sputtering. That clip is taken out of context, but the damage was done. The chairman rapped the gavel furiously. Order, order, in the chamber. Malcolm did not gloat. He simply folded his hands and waited for silence. When it came, he spoke softly. This is what happens when power operates without accountability. Good people are pressured into bad decisions. Employees are sacrificed to protect privilege. And when caught, the system denies, deflects, deceives. This isn't just about me. This is about every passenger, every worker who has ever been told they don't belong. We can't legislate dignity into existence, but we can legislate systems that protect it. For a moment, even his opponents fell quiet. Later that evening, Malcolm stood on the Capitol steps surrounded by microphones. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows. Reporters shouted questions. Do you feel vindicated? Will Claudia face charges? What comes next for Arian? He raised a hand for quiet. Vindication isn't the goal. Change is. Today wasn't about me or Miss Whitmore. It was about the truth. And the truth is, dignity is not negotiable. Not in airplanes, not in boardrooms, not anywhere. The clip aired across every network that night, replayed until it became less a soundbite than a statement of principle. Back in his hotel room, Malcolm finally exhaled. Angela hugged him tight, whispering, "You didn't just defend yourself. You planted something bigger." Leah called from New York, her voice bright over the phone. "Dad, my teacher stopped class today to watch your hearing. She said it's history. She said we'll be reading about it in books." Malcolm closed his eyes, a smile breaking through his exhaustion. Let's hope she's right. Michael Torres had never been a headline man. He was the sort who blended into the background, a steady presence in a crisp uniform, his voice calm even when passengers raised theirs. But after the congressional hearing, his name was everywhere. The morning papers called him the whistleblower who toppled pearls. Cable news debated his motives. Was he a hero? A traitor, opportunist survivor? Michael sat in a small Seattle apartment, shades drawn, phone buzzing nonstop. He hadn't gone home in days. Threats clogged his voicemail, messages snarling words he'd heard whispered all his life, but now screamed with venom. On the table lay the recorder he'd carried for 2 years, the one that had caught Claudia's order and Sharon's ugly jokes. It had once been his lifeline, his insurance against false accusations. Now, it was evidence that had changed the trajectory of an entire industry. Patricia called him directly that morning. Her voice was brisk but not unkind. "Michael, you need protection. The FBI is willing to place you under temporary security detail. You've become a target." Michael laughed bitterly. "All I ever wanted was to keep my job safe. I didn't want to be anyone's hero. I didn't want my name in history books." "Heroes rarely do," Patricia said gently. "But history has a way of choosing." Later that afternoon, a knock rattled his door. His first instinct was fear, but when he opened it, Malcolm Rivers stood there. No cameras, no entourage, just the man himself, taller in person, his presence filling the tiny hallway. "Mr. Rivers," Michael stammered. You shouldn't be here. I wanted to see you face to face," Malcolm said simply. "Can I come in?" Michael hesitated, then stepped aside. The apartment smelled faintly of stale coffee and anxiety. Malcolm looked around, taking in the drawn blinds, the unopened mail, the fatigue etched into Michael's face. "You've paid a price," Malcolm said quietly. "One I wish you didn't have to pay." Michael sank into a chair. "They're calling me a snitch, a backstabber. My own family's getting calls. My sister can't go to work without people whispering." His voice cracked. "I didn't even do it for you. I did it for me. For all the times I was blamed for something I didn't do, I just wanted to survive." Malcolm pulled a chair across from him. "Survival is no shame, Michael. And what you did went beyond survival. You told the truth when it mattered. That's never betrayal. That's courage." Michael shook his head. "Courage doesn't feel like this. Courage doesn't feel like losing everything." Malcolm leaned forward, his voice low. "Courage always costs something. Sometimes it costs comfort, sometimes reputation. But courage plants seeds, and those seeds grow in places you'll never see." They sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, Malcolm reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. "I want to offer you something. A role in Arian's new compliance and accountability office. Not as a punishment, not as a trophy, as recognition. You've lived the consequences of silence and the power of truth. That perspective is invaluable." Michael stared at the folder, disbelief in his eyes. "You're offering me a job. After all this, I'm offering you a chance to turn pain into purpose," Malcolm said. "You don't have to decide now, but think about it. That night." Michael turned the recorder over in his hands, its edges worn smooth by years of pocket rides. He thought about all the shifts he'd worked, all the jokes he'd swallowed, all the nights he'd lain awake rehearsing defenses for accusations that never came. He thought about Claudia, about Sharon, about how power insulated some while exposing others. And he thought about Malcolm Rivers, the man who had lost his seat but gained a platform, the man who had looked at him not as a pawn, but as a person. 2 days later, Michael boarded a flight to New York. He wore no uniform, carried no luggage but a single worn backpack. When the attendant at the gate smiled at him without suspicion, for the first time in years, he let himself believe in the possibility of change. Back at Arian headquarters, Malcolm received the message on his phone, "I'll take the job, but only if we promise to listen to the lowest voices, not just the loudest ones." Malcolm smiled, typing back, "That's exactly why I wanted you on the team." The ballroom at the Renaissance Hotel in Washington, D.C., glittered with chandeliers, but the mood was far from festive. Rows of tables stretched beneath the high ceiling, each marked with placards bearing the names of the world's largest airlines. CEOs, general counsels, and government regulators filled the seats, murmuring in anticipation. The press had been barred from the room, but everyone knew leaks would fly within minutes of the first speech. Malcolm Rivers adjusted his tie as he waited near the podium. Patricia stood beside him, whispering reminders. "Stay steady. No matter what they throw, they'll try to corner you with costs, with shareholder fear. Remember, you're not just answering for Arian. You're setting the tone for the industry." Angela, seated in the back of the room, caught his eye and offered a small nod. It grounded him. This was bigger than one man, bigger than one airline, but it would start with him. The chairman of the Air Transport Association banged a gavel. This extraordinary summit has been convened to address the escalating crisis of passenger rights, discrimination, and corporate accountability in aviation. We'll begin with Arian Airlines CEO, Mr. Malcolm Rivers. A low murmur swept the room. Some leaned forward eagerly, others crossed arms in open defiance. Malcolm stepped to the microphone. 4 weeks ago, I was told I didn't belong in a seat I had paid for. That moment, captured on phones and replayed around the world, exposed a truth too many already knew. Discrimination still lives in our industry. It hides in subtle glances, in unspoken policies, in unchecked privilege, but it thrives because we allow it. He paused, scanning the faces. Some eyes were sympathetic, others narrowed. I'm not here to shame any airline. I'm here to say we can no longer afford to ignore what passengers have been telling us for decades. Dignity is not optional. It is not a perk to be upsold. It is the foundation of trust in aviation. An older executive from Continental Global interrupted sharply. Fine words, Rivers, but trust doesn't pay bills. Our shareholders expect profit, not poetry. How do you intend to fund these dignity initiatives without gutting margins? Malcolm gestured to Patricia, who clicked a remote. A slide illuminated the screen behind him. Charts, numbers, case studies from Arion's last turbulent month. We've run the numbers. When treated with respect, passengers spend more, loyalty increases, partnerships expand. Since adopting our reforms, Arion has signed $200 million in new corporate contracts. Discrimination isn't just immoral, it's unprofitable. A ripple spread through the room. Even skeptics leaned closer. From the opposite side, a European CEO asked, "And what about staff resistance? Your sick-out nearly grounded your airline. How do you enforce cultural change without destroying morale?" Malcolm nodded, acknowledging the challenge. Change resisted is change misunderstood. At Arian, we're building training not as punishment, but as empowerment. We're asking employees to see passengers not as transactions, but as people. It's hard work, yes, but morale rises when people feel they're part of something bigger than compliance, when they know their integrity matters. The dialogue shifted. Some challenged, some agreed, but the room had come alive with debate. Malcolm answered each with steady conviction, never raising his voice, never dodging the hard truths. Then, unexpectedly, Claudia Whitmore entered. Though stripped of much influence after the hearing, she still held sway in certain corners of the industry. Whispers followed her as she took a seat at the rear. When the floor opened for discussion, Claudia stood. Her pearls caught the chandelier's light like tiny beacons of defiance. "Mr. Rivers," she said, her voice echoing, "your crusade sounds noble, but it reeks of arrogance. You speak as if you alone hold the keys to morality. Who are you to dictate the values of an entire industry?" The room froze. Malcolm turned slowly toward her. "I am no one special. Ms. Whitmore, I am a man who bought a ticket, sat in a seat, and was told I didn't belong because of how I looked. That could have been any one of our passengers. It has been many of them. I don't dictate values. I remind us of them, because dignity isn't my idea. It's humanity's right." A smattering of applause broke the silence, spreading until half the room was clapping. Claudia's smile faltered, but she sat down, lips pressed tight. By the end of the day, the summit had produced something unprecedented, a draft charter for a passenger dignity accord. It was non-binding, but several airlines agreed to pilot the principles. Regulators hinted at weaving it into policy. What had begun as one man's humiliation was shapen into industry-wide reform. That night, Malcolm returned to his hotel exhausted but hopeful. Angela poured him tea as Patricia read aloud the early headlines from leaks. Rivers shifts, industry conversation, passenger rights accord gains traction. But the one that struck him most came from a small blog from Seat 1A to summit a reminder that dignity flies higher than profit. The Airline headquarters in New York buzzed with the optimism of the summit. Employees moved with renewed energy, buoyed by news that their airline was no longer seen as an outcast but as a pioneer. Posters of the Passenger Dignity Accord lined the walls, carrying the slogan, "Every seat, every soul, with respect." But beneath the optimism, unease stirred. Patricia noticed at first documents missing from secure folders, strategy drafts appearing in industry newsletters, and confidential memos whispered back to competitors. One evening, she entered Malcolm's office, a stack of reports in hand. "We've got a leak," she said. "Someone inside is feeding Claudia's network. They're always one step ahead of us." Malcolm leaned back in his chair, fatigue weighing on his features. "Do we know who? Not yet. But it's high level, someone with access to the summit drafts, the compliance proposals, even Michael's appointment. Claudia's fingerprints are all over the timing." Angela, who had dropped by with dinner, looked alarmed. After everything she's lost, she still has people working for her. Malcolm shook his head slowly. Privilege doesn't die overnight. It fights to survive. And sometimes it hides in the places closest to us. The following week, the betrayal revealed itself. Michael Torres arrived at work pale, holding a manila envelope. "This was left on my doorstep," he told Patricia. Inside were photocopies of his personnel file, annotated with insults and accusations, documents that should have been locked in Arian's private HR archive. Patricia's face hardened. "This isn't just a leak. It's intimidation." Malcolm called an emergency meeting with his executive team. "We're not hunting a ghost. We're hunting someone in this room." His voice was calm, but his eyes scanned each face carefully. The silence was thick. Finally, a mid-level manager named Everett cleared his throat. "With respect, sir, are you accusing your own team?" "That's divisive." Patricia shot him a sharp look. "Divisive is selling out your colleagues." The tension stretched until Malcolm lifted a hand. "This isn't about accusation. It's about truth. And truth has a way of surfacing." 2 nights later, it did. An IT audit traced unauthorized logins to Everett's terminal. Screenshots captured him downloading files and forwarding them to an encrypted email linked to Claudia's legal counsel. The evidence was undeniable. When confronted, Everett tried to justify himself. "You don't get it," he snapped. "People like her built this industry. She promised to protect us from your experiments. You think these passengers care about dignity? They just want cheap flights and free drinks." Malcolm stood still, his expression unreadable. "So you sold out your colleagues. You endangered Michael. You sabotaged reforms not for principle, but for fear." Everett's voice rose, desperate. "You're going to destroy everything we built, all for some crusade?" "No," Malcolm said quietly. "I'm trying to rebuild what should have existed all along." Everett was escorted out that night, his ID badge disabled, His name scrubbed from Arian's leadership page. The betrayal rocked the company. Whispers ran through the halls if someone that close could undermine them. Who else was watching morale wavered. Michael felt it acutely. One afternoon, he sat with Angela in the cafeteria, his eyes heavy. I thought things would be safer once the truth came out, but it feels like every time I breathe, someone's waiting to choke me back. Angela touched his hand gently. You're not alone anymore. That's the difference. You have allies now. And so does Malcolm. Malcolm, meanwhile, gathered his leadership team. Everett's betrayal isn't the end. It's proof of how deep the resistance runs. Claudia may have lost her stage, but she still has strings to pull. We can't just defend ourselves, we need to fortify. Patricia outlined a new plan: encrypted communication protocols, independent audits, whistleblower hotlines managed by third parties. If they try to rot us from the inside, we'll show transparency on the outside, she declared. But Malcolm knew the deeper truth. Trust wasn't built on protocols alone. It was built on culture, one where employees no longer feared retaliation, no longer clung to old loyalties out of desperation. That evening, he sent a message to the entire company. It was simple, not polished, recorded from his office without a teleprompter. We've been betrayed, he admitted, by one of our own. But betrayal won't define us. What will define us is how we respond with honesty, with courage, with dignity. We don't hide our wounds. We heal them, together. The video spread not just inside Arian, but across social media, hailed as one of the most transparent executive addresses in recent memory. Employees wrote back with stories of resilience, of why they stayed, of how dignity had already changed the way they worked. Claudia, watching from the shadows, realized her tactics were backfiring. Every act of sabotage only strengthened Malcolm's credibility. Every betrayal uncovered only deepened Arian's resolve. But she wasn't done yet. The winter sky over Chicago was the color of slate when Malcolm boarded Flight 782 to Washington, D.C. The trip wasn't for business meetings or hearings. It was for something more symbolic. Ariane had just relaunched its flagship route with new training protocols, new crew guidelines, and a promised dignity on every flight. Malcolm wanted to experience it as a passenger, not a CEO. He wore a simple gray coat, no entourage, no announcement, just another traveler on a cold evening, ticket in hand. Angela urged him to let security accompany him, but he shook his head. If we're asking passengers to trust us, I have to trust the system too. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere buzzed. Passengers whispered, some recognizing him, others oblivious. The crew, fresh from the new training program, exchanged nervous glances when they spotted him. The lead flight attendant, a young woman named Danielle, approached with composure. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Rivers. We're honored to have you." Malcolm smiled warmly. "I'm just here as Malcolm tonight. Treat me like anyone else." The flight took off smoothly, but halfway through, turbulence rocked the plane, drink spilled, a child cried, and tension rippled through the cabin. In the middle of the chaos, an argument broke out in row 12. A white businessman in a tailored suit was berating a young black college student seated beside him. "You people always take up more than your share." He sneered loudly enough for half the cabin to hear. "Move your bag before I throw it out myself." The student froze, shrinking back. Danielle moved quickly, crouching beside them. "Sir, please lower your voice. Let's resolve this calmly." But the businessman grew louder. Calm. I paid for this seat. I don't need to sit next to this." He stopped short, but the slur hung heavy in the air. The cabin fell silent. All eyes turned. For a heartbeat, the scene echoed Malcolm's own humiliation weeks earlier, the sting of exclusion, the weight of being told you don't belong. Malcolm unbuckled his belt and stood, not as CEO, not as executive, but as a passenger unwilling to let history repeat itself. He walked down the aisle, steady, unhurried, and stopped beside the student. "Excuse me," he said softly, addressing the businessman. "That young man has the same right to this space as you. Your comfort does not outweigh his dignity." The businessman scoffed, his face reddening. "Who are you to tell me what to do?" Before Malcolm could reply, another passenger, a Latina mother seated across the aisle, spoke up. "He's someone who knows what it's like to be treated unfairly. And he's right. Enough." A ripple of agreement spread. Passengers murmured support. The student, eyes wide, whispered, "Thank you." Danielle straightened, her voice clear and firm. "Sir, I must insist you stop harassing other passengers. If you cannot comply, we will arrange for federal officers to meet you upon landing." The businessman sputtered, but the weight of the cabin's silence pressed him down. He sank into his seat, muttering under his breath. Malcolm turned to the student, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You belong here. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise." The cabin exhaled collectively. The turbulence outside had passed, but a deeper turbulence had been calmed inside. When the plane landed in Washington, federal officers quietly escorted the businessman away. Passengers applauded Danielle and her crew. Someone filmed the moment when the student shook Malcolm's hand, tears in his eyes. The clip hit social media within hours. Rivers stands with passenger in mid-flight confrontation. News outlets framed it as the redemption flight. The symbolism was too strong to ignore the man once humiliated in seat 1A, now standing up for another in row 12. Back at Aryan headquarters, Patricia reviewed the footage with a rare smile. "We couldn't have scripted it better," she admitted. "Not that we'd ever script something like this, but the world just saw Aryan's promise come to life." Michael watched the video too, his chest tight. "That kid could have been me," he said softly. Angela, standing beside him, replied, "That's why it matters so much that Malcolm stood." Later that night, Malcolm sat in his hotel room, reflecting. He hadn't planned to intervene, hadn't wanted the spotlight, but dignity demanded action, and action had ripple effects. His phone buzzed with messages from across the country, passengers thanking him, parents telling stories, employees saying they were proud to wear the Aryan badge again. He closed his eyes, hearing his daughter Leah's voice from a past conversation. "Dad, sometimes history finds you when you least expect it." She had been right. The morning after Flight 782 landed, America woke up to a flood of headlines. Redemption in row 12 Rivers stands up for passenger from victim to advocate. CEO's defining flight dignity in the skies. Can at last clips from the flight circled every platform. The video of Malcolm placing his hand on the young student's shoulder racked up millions of views overnight. Comment sections filled with messages like, "That's leadership," and, finally, "Someone practicing what they preach." But not everyone cheered. Certain outlets accused Malcolm of orchestrating the confrontation. A PR stunt. One pundit scoffed. The cameras were too perfectly placed. Others argued he had humiliated a paying customer to score moral points. The debate spilled into talk shows, podcasts, dinner tables. Patricia sat in her office, monitoring the storm. It's polarizing, she told Malcolm over speakerphone, but the momentum is on our side. The hashtag #EarRedemptionFlight is trending globally. We can't waste it. Angela chimed in from the sofa, her voice softer but firmer. You didn't do it for momentum. You did it because it was right. That's what people will remember. At Aryan headquarters, employees walked with heads held higher. Danielle, the flight attendant from 782, was hailed as a model of professionalism. When Malcolm called her personally to thank her, she nearly cried. I was terrified, she admitted. But when I saw you stand, I knew I wasn't alone. The young student, Jamal Green, appeared on morning television. I didn't know who he was at first, Jamal said shyly, but when Mr. Rivers spoke up, it felt like someone finally said what I couldn't, that I belonged. His voice cracked, and the clip touched millions. Claudia Whitmore, watching from her estate, fumed. She called allies in the industry, urging them to push back against the hero narrative. Yet the more she attacked, the smaller her circle grew. Investors distanced themselves. Politicians stopped returning her calls. The power she once wielded had withered to whispers. Meanwhile, Aryan's stock, once shaky, began climbing. Corporate clients renewed contracts. Surveys showed passenger satisfaction rising sharply, particularly among minority travelers who felt seen for the first time. But the true verdict came not in markets or polls. It came in people. Letters poured in from across the country. A grandmother who remembered being told to give up her seat in the 1960s. A teacher who showed her class the redemption flight video. A father who promised to fly Aryan because he wanted his kids to know dignity was possible. One evening, Malcolm sat in his office reading those letters aloud to Angela. Listen to this, he said, voice thick. I never thought I'd live to see an airline CEO stand up like a regular passenger. You made me believe my granddaughter might be treated better than I was. He folded the letter carefully, as though it were fragile glass. Angela touched his arm. You see, it's not just flights you're changing, it's lives. But the applause also carried pressure. Editorials demanded, what next? Would Aryan's reforms spread across the industry? Would Congress codify passenger rights into law? Would this moment fade like so many others? Or carve a lasting mark? Patricia pressed him. The public loves a symbol, but symbols fade. We need concrete steps. The passenger dignity accord must move from draft to reality. If we let the energy dissipate, Claudia or someone like her will rise again. Malcolm nodded slowly. He knew she was right. The redemption flight had been powerful, but it was still one flight, one night, one act. To secure lasting change, they would need something larger, systemic, binding, undeniable. That night, Malcolm drafted a statement, not polished by lawyers, not filtered through PR, just his voice, typed in quiet resolve. To the people of this country, dignity is not negotiable. We at Aryan have stumbled, we have been tested, but we have chosen to rise. No passenger should ever fear humiliation at 30,000 feet. No employee should ever feel pressured to betray their integrity. The skies belong to all of us, and together we will protect them. The statement went viral, not because of corporate gloss, but because of its plain humanity. Late-night hosts quoted it. Churches read it aloud. Teachers printed it for classrooms. Public opinion had delivered its verdict. Malcolm Rivers was no longer just a CEO. He had become a symbol of resilience, of justice, of what it meant to stand up, literally, in the face of humiliation, in the quiet after the storm. Malcolm looked at Angela and whispered, "This isn't about me anymore. It never was." Angela smiled gently. "That's why they believe you." Spring came to New York with a gentleness that felt almost foreign after months of storms. The cherry trees along the Hudson blossomed, and Arian's headquarters gleamed with sunlight as if it, too, had endured winter and found renewal. Malcolm Rivers stood at the tall windows of his office, watching the river flow steady and sure. The months behind him had been bruising humiliation in Seat 1A, betrayal from within, battles in Congress, the redemption flight, but they had also reshaped not only an airline, but the national conversation. Patricia entered quietly, a folder under her arm. "It's official," she said, her tone equal parts relief and triumph. 7 major airlines have signed the Passenger Dignity Accord. The Department of Transportation is drafting regulations based on it. You did it, Malcolm. It's bigger than Arian now. Malcolm turned, smiling faintly. Not me, us, and not finished. Legacy isn't about what's signed, it's about what's lived. Later that afternoon, Arian held a ceremony in Terminal C at JFK, where the journey had begun. The same concourse that once echoed with whispers of exclusion now filled with applause. Employees, passengers, journalists, and even lawmakers gathered to mark the moment. Danielle, the young flight attendant, spoke first. "I used to think dignity was above my pay grade. Now I know it's part of my job description and part of my humanity. Thank you for showing us that." Michael Torres followed, voice steady though his hands trembled. "I never wanted to be in the spotlight, but if telling the truth helped protect even one more employee, one more passenger, then it was worth the price. Arian gave me a chance not just to survive, but to matter." The crowd rose in ovation. Angela, standing near the front, wiped tears discreetly. She glanced at Leah, their daughter, who clutched her hand tightly, eyes shining. Finally, Malcolm stepped to the microphone. The room hushed. "I began this journey as a man told to leave his seat." He said, "I stand here now because so many refuse to accept that humiliation as normal. This isn't just about airplanes. It's about classrooms where children are told they don't belong, offices where voices go unheard, streets where lives are devalued. Dignity doesn't stop at the cabin door. It must carry into every space we inhabit." He paused, letting the words breathe. "One day, my daughter will board a plane and no one will question her right to sit where she belongs. That is the world we're building, not just for her, but for all of us." The applause shook the walls. Cameras captured the moment. But those present swore it was more than sound. It was the pulse of change. Weeks later, Malcolm walked through Harlem with Leah, showing her murals that had sprung up after the redemption flight. One painted his silhouette not as a CEO in a suit, but as a man standing in an airplane aisle, hand on the shoulder of a frightened passenger. Above it, words sprawled in bright colors. "You belong." Leah tugged his hand. "Dad, is that really you?" Malcolm smiled softly. "It's an artist's version of me, but the message that belongs to all of us." Angela snapped a picture, laughing. "History books, murals. I married a man who tried to blend in and ended up on walls." Malcolm chuckled, shaking his head. "I'd trade every mural for one guarantee that dignity becomes habit, not headline." Months rolled on. Claudia Whitmore faded further into obscurity, her name whispered only as a cautionary tale in business schools. Arian flourished, not just in profits but in culture. Employees reported record satisfaction, Passengers wrote testimonials that felt less like feedback and more like gratitude. In time, Malcolm announced he would step down as CEO. The room gasped when he told the board, but he explained it simply. Leadership isn't about staying in the seat forever. It's about knowing when to pass it on. I want to see this airline live beyond me, to know the values we fought for aren't tied to one name. Patricia, ever the strategist, asked, "What will you do next?" Malcolm looked out the window, thoughtful, teach, mentor, maybe write, help young leaders find their voices before the world tells them to be silent. Angela squeezed his hand, pride glimmering in her eyes. On his final day at Arian, employees lined the halls to clap him out, a tradition once reserved for retiring pilots. Michael stood near the door, whispering, "Thank you, boss." Danielle saluted playfully. Jamal Green, now finishing his first year of college, handed Malcolm a note. "Because you stood, I stayed." Malcolm carried those words with him as he stepped outside into the spring air. Legacy, he realized, wasn't about titles or corner offices. It was about moments when someone dared to say, "You belong." Moments when courage outweighed comfort. Moments when dignity won. He smiled as Angela and Leah joined him on the sidewalk. The river kept flowing. The city kept humming. And above them, planes traced white lines across the sky, reminders that even the heaviest bodies could lift, given enough trust and lift beneath their wings. The story of Malcolm Rivers reminds us that dignity is not a luxury. It is a birthright. Being asked to leave his seat was not about a chair on an airplane, but about the deeper wound of being told he was less than. Many of us, especially older generations, have lived through moments where we were silenced, overlooked, or forced to accept what felt unjust. This story brings those memories back, but it also offers hope. The lesson is simple, yet profound silence protects injustice. But courage, no matter how costly, plants the seeds of change, whether in our families, workplaces, or communities. Each of us has the power to stand up for someone else's dignity. Sometimes it is not about grand speeches or headlines. Sometimes it is a quiet hand on someone's shoulder that says, "You belong." As we grow older, we understand more clearly that respect, compassion, and fairness are what truly endure. The world may change, but the call to honor human dignity never fades. Let us carry this reminder into our daily lives, choosing to be the kind of people who leave others standing taller, not smaller. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. Stories like these only matter when they're shared, remembered, and lived out. If this touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so together we can keep lifting up voices of dignity and justice.